We love supporting and helping entrepreneurs. We also have a data science and web development program. So if you're interested in learning more about being a member of the community here at Galvanize, please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. So excited to have Persian women in tech here at Galvanize. I know somebody reached out to me. I was really excited because I had wanted to come to one of these events for a really long time, and lo and behold, it happened here at Galvanize. So thank you. It's really an honor to have you guys.
I would say thank you so much, and it's only because of companies like Galvanize or other companies that have hosted us that we can have our community together. Before I start talking about Persian women in tech and then go into our panel discussion, I always like to get a feel of the room. So show of hands, how many have been already to a Persian women in tech event? Okay, a few of you. Welcome to the newcomers. How many of you are technologists? That's engineers, data scientists. Come on, I know you guys are awesome, great. How many of you are entrepreneurs? Founders of company? Yeah, good. I always like to ask this, but today I can actually ask. How many of you are investors? There are plenty of them actually out there. Awesome. Well, welcome. My name is Sepideh, Nasiri, and I'm the founder and CEO of Persian Women in Tech. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 3 years. And the first question I always get is, why are the men here? Well, why are you here? You have to be part of the conversation. So one of the many reasons we invite everyone is because our mission at Persian Women in Tech is to elevate the profile of Iranian women in technology. And in order to do that, we actually need the entire ecosystem supporting us. That includes men, that includes women, that includes actually other cultures and other ethnicities as well. So as I mentioned, we have been around for 3 years. We are now in 9 cities around the world. That includes Paris, London, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Boston, Austin, Texas, San Francisco. We're in South Bay and also in East Bay. This year, we're looking to launch in 10 more cities. So if you'd like to bring us in your city, please email us at info@persianwomenintech.com, and we're able to give you more information in regards to that. As I mentioned earlier, without the support of the ecosystem, we are not able to give back to our community, which is you. So if you're working for a tech company, please talk to us. We would love to come to your venue. One of the many reasons companies support us and bring us in is actually you, because you are the talent. 90% of our community is technical. So if you're looking to hire, this is the best way to bring in a diverse talent pool to your company and showcase who you are and what you're working on. And they get an opportunity actually directly to talk to your hiring managers as well. Another reason I want to, actually today I'm going to switch a little bit the conversation is Persian Women in Tech is fundraising. But we're doing it a little bit different because we are 501c3. As a nonprofit, we're expanding, as I just mentioned, but we also need to add on employees, but also new programs that we're working on to launch in 2019. And with that in mind, we're also adding on founding members, board of advisors, and board of directors. I'm excited to share that we've already added on 2 founding members and 4 people that are going to be part of our Circle for Her, which is our male allies, and including also some investors. And one interesting thing is, what I have to share is, they're all men. So where are the women? If you are wanting to have the support system, you actually need to support us as well so that we can give back to the community. So I'm challenging you today. If you are interested in being part of the ecosystem, if you are interested in supporting your community and also supporting yourself and the future women in tech, you need to be part of that conversation and have a seat. Thank you so much. With that in mind, I would like to introduce our panelists. And the theme today is about diversity in VC investing, and that's a great conversation to actually go into. I'll start with giving each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into the panel session. Does that sound good to everyone? A round
also Persian. I moved to the Bay Area 2 years ago, and I'm currently an investor at the Urban Innovation Fund. We're actually a seed stage fund that's focused on investing in startups that are shaping the future of our cities. So really excited to be here and hopefully share some of the things that we're doing at the fund and trends that we're seeing in venture.
Hi everybody, I'm Partovi. I have been an investor for many years, and in the past year I started a new firm called NEO, which is a community that aims to find some of the top undergraduate computer scientists around the country and invest in startups that they start or join.
Hi everyone, I'm Mitra. I'm a partner at the South Park Commons Fund, just a few blocks away. South Park Commons is a learning community for folks who are figuring out what to do next, and attached to it we have a fund that invests both within the community and outside, so really looking forward to chatting with you tonight.
Hi guys, I'm Kashani. I started a couple of startups and had a short experience at Pear Ventures. My last startup was acquired by Postmates in its infancy basically, and I now lead the X division at Postmates, which is kind of the secret projects unit where we focus on things that would change the growth trajectory of Postmates by an order of magnitude.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. So today we are talking about diversity in VC investing, which means that's something that we've been talking about now for, I think, like 2 years. It's all about why aren't we investing in women and why aren't we giving more diverse, underrepresented minorities funding for their startup. So the first question that comes to mind is, why is there a lack of underrepresented minority VC partners? Because that's where it starts sometimes. You know, if you don't have that person right in front of you understanding and being there and being accessible, that already starts with the roots. Ali, do you want to tell us why there aren't enough women and underrepresented?
I'm happy to hypothesize. I've only been, so my new firm includes a VC fund as well. I've only been a VC for about 6 months now. I have a partner, and her name is Nadia. So I don't know why it's so difficult for other people, but I would say that I think part of it is just inertia, and you know, the tech industry. You know, if you go back 30 years ago, there were a lot more just men in general, and it's like many other things. It's hard to, you know, get rid of people, you know, to make room for new people in general. And VC firms, VC partnerships are have, you know, very long-term type relationships. And so, a firm that might already have 4 male partners from 20 years, they can't just suddenly double their partnership size. So, it's, you know, I think there's a life cycle of new funds being formed, or probably it's easier to add female partners for something new, such as my own fund now. But at the same time, I also think there's change happening pretty rapidly. Like in the last 5 years, and especially in the past year, I think there's been a huge desire to add female partners in VC funds. Reid Hoffman at Greylock, I forget how many years ago, kind of announced that they would not hire any new partners until they hired a female GP. And then certainly after some of the events of the past year, like the whole Justin Caldeck and what happened there, I think there's been a very serious effort by VC firms to hire female partners. But I think there's also then the challenge of they're risk averse about taking a bet on someone who doesn't already have experience investing, and that becomes kind of like a circular challenge, because if there's so few of them to begin with, you know. And so ironically, like the female partner that Reid Hoffman hired at Greylock, you know, Sarah Tavel, after a certain period of time, Benchmark poached her from Greylock. So it's like the same few women are being, you know, traded back and forth. I do think firms need to just, I guess you could say risk, but it's just basically take, you know, take a leap of faith on bringing on women who don't already have investing experience to expand the pool.
agree, and I also wanted to point out that there's several other partners that have been added on. I think Sequoia has Jessie from Delaware, for example. She came on board, and several other ones too. And they don't have experience. They brought them in because they were entrepreneurs first, build a company. That operation experience was very important and crucial to their decision making. Anyone else wants to add on to this?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is also to add on to what Ali was saying. I think one perception as to why there's not enough women GPs at firms is that there's a pipeline problem, that there's not enough talented women out there. I mean, that's a myth, and that's not true, and I think the research has shown that there are plenty of women that have the qualifications and skills to take on the roles of GP at a firm. I think groups like All Raise, led by the likes of Aileen Lee and the team, where they're essentially firms that have female GPs are coming together and putting together lists of women in executive roles in the corporate sector or in other sectors who would be good candidates for GPs of firms, so that when a firm says, look, we want to bring on a female partner, but we don't know any women, or we can't find any women that are qualified, they can't rely on that excuse. I do think an actual barrier, though, is a structural one, which is that usually when you look at how a VC firm is formed, in order to become or be promoted to a general partner status, you're often buying in to the firm and you're putting your own money on the table. And not all women have the capital stored to be able to do that. So that's a structural barrier. And I think, as Ali mentioned, there are a lot of female-led firms popping up to combat this, and that's one way out of this problem.
Awesome. And by the way, just a side note, Urban Innovation Fund just closed their round, so if you need money, she's just also. Anyone else wants to add on to this one? No?
Actually, so I want to make the question a little bit broader, so not just partners, because VC partners is a very, very kind of small community at the end of the day. I think you're right. There's plenty of diverse talent out there, whether we're talking about women or people from other kind of ethnicities, whatnot. Is this on? Yeah. No. Is it not? It seems on.
It's on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay, this is better. So if we just broaden this to the general problem, whether we're talking about investors as a whole, or even go to say hiring process and everything, there is a bias problem that I think everybody recognizes. There is, I think, some pipeline problem in the kind of VC side of things. 50% of VCs have MBAs, but 30% of MBA students are women. There is also the fact that 40% of VCs have a startup background, so they're an operator, but only 17% of startup operators are women. So there is some problem there that we should be cognizant of, but that bias that we were talking about affects every step of this pipeline. So we have to start with the bias. We have to then, let the pipeline kind of also be either fixed or over time improved. The last thing I want to just mention, because I feel like that's not mentioned a lot, is a bit of a self-selection happening. So if someone, for instance, there's a good study on this, if someone thinks they're not good in math, they will perform worse in math. And if you actually try to reinforce that right before a math test, they would actually do even worse. So it's a very discouraging thing. The first generation of programmers were actually very kind of gender neutral. The first programmer was a woman. And you look at like 20 years later, this really, really changed because computers were promoted or were kind of marketed for men. So women, by the time they showed up in college, felt like they're not as good in computers. So we have a self-selection process or problem that we should also be thinking about, which I think is a bit of a longer-term problem to solve.
That's a good point. What I don't need this one. I have a really loud voice. So I think, when we think about first, yes, we do need the investors to invest into underrepresented minorities in order to then move forward, as you said, in the cycle. What are some of the various funds and founders face today? Mitra, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Could you repeat the question?
What are some of the various funds and founders, the funds and the founders face when it comes to investing and promoting underrepresented minorities?
Sure. When we at South Park Commons Fund look at different companies and entrepreneurs, as I'm sure you're all aware, we receive our deal flow through a mix of inbound and outbound efforts. So outbound efforts would be our pounding the pavement to go look for entrepreneurs or founders who just exited who are looking for their next thing. And a lot of those outbound efforts are through friendships or social networks or word of mouth. So they perpetuate the former employers that I and my partners have worked for, or the universities we've attended, or the friendships we've had. So in our case, lots of Iranian and Indian founders reflecting our backgrounds, but certainly not as diverse as the ecosystem. And then same thing with the inbound deal flow that we receive. It's a mix of people who have heard of our fund and reach out, or friends of our South Park Commons members, already a group that self-selects for different demographics, or people who just hear about us through media. So I think as we attempt to diversify our pipeline, there are both inbound and outbound things we can do to improve that. One is challenging ourselves to move around the country a little more, look at different cities, different universities, different former employers in different parts of the US, or really the world, that give us exposure to different networks rather than our own. And then secondly, with some of the members we recruit to the South Park Commons community, looking for folks who also aren't former Dropboxers or Facebookers. So it's a mix of our own challenge and our own work, as well as putting the message out there that we invest in lots of different types of people and companies.
So I can kind of provide my experience from a founder's point of view. I think, again, an obvious one is similar to the bias issue that we talked about earlier. Venture capital or investing in general, a lot of it is about pattern matching, especially when it's early stage and you don't have a lot of data. So a lot of investors rely on their instinct. So that's where biases can really take a big toll on how decisions are made. If you think that most successful entrepreneurs are white, male, college student, you're likely to invest in them more. So I think that's an obvious problem. There are two other problems that I think I personally found really important. One is lack of support and mentorship. So my experience was that I didn't necessarily have the same access to mentors and advisors to help me actually get my startup to the position where I can actually show up in front of a VC and be successful. I think that's a really important one that is often not discussed, and I think we as a community can actually do a lot to address that. One that is, again, even more challenging probably to address is the problem of maybe lack of role models or inspiration. As in, I remember the first time I realized that I have the option, so I grew up in Iran, that I have the option of studying in a foreign university. This was not on the menu for me. This was not something I ever thought was possible. And then it suddenly kind of just a light bulb went off that that's actually a possibility. Or when the first time I showed up to Silicon Valley and I realized there's so many people in our community who are highly successful. They have a funny accent like me. They have, they were born in Iran. All those stuff that I thought was always going to stop me, but they're at the table. They're actually doing this. And this was a very life-changing kind of moment. I think this is another thing that we need to help address. If you have any reason to think you have something blocking you, seeing someone who's moved past that actually helps a lot getting you past yours.
And I think that's really important in regards to the mentorship that you just mentioned. Our community has so much to give, and I think, when you're looking today and when you meet someone today, I hope you are supporting them as much as the panel here is going to be doing. So each one of you has a network where you can support someone who needs something. So don't just think about it that, the panel here can support the ecosystem. Each one of you are able and capable to do something for your community as well. Anyone else wants to add on to this one?
First of all, I think you guys are both correct. I think that the sort of the underlying human behaviors that I think everyone is susceptible to, pattern matching is an extremely human kind of how we think, and part of that is the staying within your close network is, I think, pretty common. Whether it's whether you're starting a VC firm or starting a startup, the easiest, kind of most natural place to look is your immediate circle, which very often will be people just like yourself. And I think I would advise everybody, whether you're an entrepreneur starting a company or whether you're an investor, force yourself outside of that because it'll make you stronger. So in my case, it would have probably been easier for me to bring on a partner in my new firm who's, very much like myself.
Like a twin brother.
Like a twin brother, yes. But if I had a successful twin with experience investing, I would totally. But yeah, no, it takes an extra effort and risk, not in the sense of huge risk, but just outside your comfort zone to say, well, I'm going to try extra hard to find someone who is different from me. The person I ended up finding actually turns out is half Iranian, although I didn't know that. So when I was introduced to her, the person who introduced us didn't know she was half Iranian. But yeah, in general, I would say that groups are stronger when they are heterogeneous. I'm using that word rather than saying diverse because we think of diverse as representing certain specific underrepresented groups, but women or Latinos and Latinas might be underrepresented in our industry, but a group that was only women or only Latinos would not be diverse per se either. Like truly strong, the strength comes from embracing differences, and so I would say that we can all benefit our organizations by making that effort to bring in people who think different from ourselves and have different backgrounds.
Well, I'm coming to you anyways. Next question. How's your firm or company taking charge or implementing change and creating opportunities for underrepresented minorities, and also obviously that includes females?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think one of the interesting things, just drawing from my own experience, when I joined the Urban Innovation Fund just under 2 years ago, we're a new fund. So essentially we were designing our firm from scratch, which meant we had to be super intentional, and we wanted to be super intentional about the way we designed the firm to make sure that we were creating a culture that was inclusive, but that our processes also enabled some of the biases in the decision-making process, as well as some of the external forces that we know of, to be addressed head-on. And so I'll give you a couple of examples of kind of the ways we've tried to do this. The first is that we have tried to have really a diverse deal flow, and it helps that we're all women. So my team is Julie, Clara, and myself. We didn't come together by virtue of our gender. It's coincidental, but it's fascinating the amount of diverse deal flow we get, particularly female founders who will look on our website, see someone that resembles them and feel more comfortable to perhaps reach out in a way that they might not have before. Another thing is that we, and I think Mitra, you kind of touched on this point, really recognize geographical diversity as being super important with deal flow. So one thing that we can do to empower underrepresented founders is to look outside the Bay Area, to look outside New York, Boston, Chicago, the places that are getting most of the money. And so actually actively right now we're recruiting for an associate in the Midwest to be based in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. If you know anyone great, please send them my way. But this is part of an intentional effort to recognize talent. What we've tried to do, drawing on some of the momentum of all the amazing other VC firms out there, is to professionalize some of our processes. So what I mean by that is, when we look at venture capital, it's ironically one of the professions where there's very little professionalization, and the boundaries between the personal and the professional are real. So who is perceived as a colleague is often very vague. Someone you're meeting for coffee that might be an entrepreneur is also your friend, or if you're at a networking event, who is a colleague / friend / not one of the above. And so we try to really spell out and codify, codes of conduct. So if you feel uncomfortable as an associate at our firm, if you feel uncomfortable as a portfolio company in terms of the interactions that are happening, feel free to walk away. If an investor wants you to meet them at a hotel room lobby or at a bar to have drinks and you're expected to go there for pitch for money, feel free to walk away. And building a culture that's inclusive inclusive for women, for people of color, for different groups within the US, and that's something that we take really seriously. And that's really related to some of the things that are being exposed in the last year with the hashtag #MeToo, Justin Colbeck, and he's not the only one. There have been a lot of culprits that have been exposed, and it's not also unfortunately unique to venture capital. We see it in the entertainment industry and others. So being super intentional in professionalizing as many of the processes, I think, really helps. Now, in terms of tackling the bias problem, which is real, what we've tried to do is build, as much as we can, data-driven decision-making. And so what we'll do is track at every point in our pipeline diversity statistics. So let's, think about some of the common examples that are given. So a lot of funds will say, look, we don't have a problem with diversity and inclusion because we see a ton of founders. We see 2,000 companies a year, and 1,000 of them will be people of color, women, Hispanic, Latinx. We're fine. But when you look at how many they've necessarily invested in, there might be 0 diverse founders, or 1% or 5%, which isn't reflective of the top of the funnel. On the flip side, you've got a lot of funds that might have invested in diverse founders, but aren't seeing enough diverse founders in the first place. And I think the cause of that problem is, as my panelists have so eloquently stated, because we tend to be attracted to people who look like, talk like us, think like us, and our own networks. And so part of the pipeline or diversity problem is to make sure that we're checking ourselves as funds and investors at every point in the process. Am I seeing enough diverse founders? Am I meeting them for a first meeting? Are enough coming to a second meeting? Are we doing enough diligence on them? And at the end process, are we investing in enough diverse founders? And really excited to say that 71% of the companies we've backed at the Urban Innovation Fund have a woman or a person of color on the founding team. And we think that this is because we have diverse deal flow. And last but not least, it would go amiss if I didn't mention the fact that I think as investors, it's just as important for us to make sure that the companies we're investing in are fostering cultures of inclusivity and valuing diversity. And the way that we can do that as investors, and that you can do that as founders, is to make sure that, they say in your first 20 hires, if you can't hire a woman, something is wrong with your hiring process. If you can't build that culture actively and intentionally from the beginning, it's much harder to change when there's more than 20 or 50 or 100 people. And there are great consulting companies out there who can help you with this, companies like Ready Set, Rory Gerberg in the audience, and others that are really actively trying to change the culture of tech companies. So these are, I know I've talked at length, it's obviously something I'm super excited about and passionate about, but I think we need to be super intentional because the problem out there is real, but there are solutions, and many firms are trying to pave the way and paint solutions to the problem rather than just emphasize the problem.
If I could just add to that, May, what a wonderful answer. It will be hard for any of us to follow, but I'll attempt to do so. You brought up, I thought, very strong points about the blurry line between formal business proposals and then this informal social world. One thing my partner Ruchi will call out to our portfolio founders is, on the flip side of that, many of them who are male don't feel comfortable inviting her out to drinks or socializing with her. So she, as one of their several investors, will be disadvantaged in learning about their company because they are so afraid of crossing the line with her. So I would challenge all of us here, no matter our gender, to be creative and upfront in establishing ways to build and maintain your network that you're comfortable with. One of my portfolio founders is there in the corner, and he can tell you I've done things like karaoke, board game nights, trivia nights, ways that I can connect with founders socially that don't make me feel uncomfortable. And I encourage you all to figure out what those are and to share them and to ask them of the people who you work with.
That is awesome. That's really awesome. Ali, you and I had a conversation a little while ago in regards to in regards to how you hire now at Postmates. And one significant thing you talked about, which I thought it was super interesting, and I'm giving you the opportunity, how to hire such a diverse diverse team, and you're still, I know, working on that. But how did you really do it? And if you want to address that here as well, I think that's super important on the founder side, because investors are looking for diverse teams, and when they have come to a point of the company is certainly growing really fast, it's really the manager's job to do that as well.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say we are not done. We have a lot of work to do. We still there's a few dimensions here. I should kind of preface it by saying there is a lot of self-interest in this. I want to be clear. I think any team that doesn't recognize the value in diversity, they're really missing out. We are dealing with some really interesting problems that affects everybody. And it's everybody in a city is going to be affected by a product we're building. So it's really unfortunate if we don't have people on the table who can actually help us think about all the aspects of this, and that diversity really helps us. So we have, I'm very proud, we have people from 20-something to 70 years old in our team. So there's age is one dimension. We have the first person's name who became repeated in the team, as in we had a second person with that name was Korean. It wasn't John or, on the gender side, this is where we are still working really hard, but one of the things is diversifying the hiring process itself. So I have my colleague Kimia here actually, who leads our hiring process. To me, it's really, really valuable to have someone like her, because trying to attract, a female technical talent to the team, they would be more comfortable when the person they're interacting with is actually a woman themselves and a minority. So that's kind of one aspect. The other side of it that I think is more less discussed but very important is if we just steal talent from other people and we are kind of doing what Ali was mentioning earlier, we are not really solving the global problem. So I think mentoring and being accessible to people who are underrepresented is also really important, which goes back to something I mentioned earlier in the conversation. So that's kind of another thing that we try to do as part of our efforts.
Great.
If I can jump in on this, first of all, I agree with all those. I think, candidly, it's a lot easier when you're starting something new. So I don't know if I would be able to give us the same advice to like a larger existing organization. That's a bigger challenge to diversify something that's already established. Once you have, if you have 20 employees and they're all male, it's far harder to attract a strong female employee because they don't want to work there. And so, and same thing with any, if they're all white, it's harder to get someone who's not white, or if they're all Asian. Whereas if you start early, it's far easier. It's far easier to perpetuate diversity if you have it early on. In terms of, I think it's the challenge is greater with hiring engineers, because there is actually a pipeline issue with engineering talent. Roughly 1 out of 5 students in high school. In high school computer science, roughly 1 out of 5 have been female historically. In college computer science, roughly 1 out of 5 have been female historically. And in the tech industry at large, roughly 1 out of 5 of the workforce has been female. And so there is some correlation there. On the very, very promising plus side, the public school system is adopting computer science at a breakneck speed, in large part due to my twin brother's organization, Code.org. Today, the number of students studying computer science in public school dwarfs the entire population of engineers in the rest of the world. And so and the distribution there is very promising. So the high school distribution now is significantly more female. And if you look at the 5th and 6th grade cohort, I think about half of the students in the United States are on Code.org in 5th and 6th grade. It's insane. And the distribution there is 50% female and 45% people of color. So as that cohort grows up, we will have a huge improvement in the pipeline. But in the meantime, for those of us who are looking for for employees today and aren't waiting 8 years or whatever, the rules of thumb that I encourage founders to think about, one is that hiring for diversity is about an allocation of effort. some people mistakenly think of the term of lowering the bar and say, oh, well, if we were to bring on people from these underrepresented groups, we would have to lower the bar. And that's really wrong, and it's, first of all, it's insulting, but it's also, it's based on kind of understandable logic, but it's faulty logic. What it does mean, it's not free. You have to spend more time. If you just go to the people who are near you, who are like you, it might be easier and require less effort, but you will get, results that are not diverse. To bring on people who are different from yourself, you need to put extra effort into it. It's not free, it costs more, but the results are worth it. And then the other thing is to think of it as hiring is forecasting. You're not hiring someone based on the skills they possess at this instant and how they will immediately perform. If you're building an organization, you're forecasting what will this person grow into over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And to do that well, obviously it's harder to know where they're heading, but you can look at the trajectory someone's been on. If somebody has been, coding since they were 12 and is at this level, and another person, maybe that's a man, and there's a woman who's been coding since 1 year ago, and she's also at the same level, she's clearly learning way faster and actually heading for a perhaps far better outcome. And so you can at least think about some of these things. So for my firm, we are actively, scouring universities around the country and find promising undergraduates. We've put these practices into play. So starting with our own team, my team is just 4 people. I'm the only man on the team, and only 2 of us have tech industry backgrounds. The other 2, one came from public education, and the other one came from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And so, I believe very strongly in taking risks on people who have overcome adversity to get to where they are, and generally I think that is a risk, but it also is a risk with odds of success. And then in terms of the students that we recruit, we have made a huge effort. It would be easier to just get a bunch of Harvard and Stanford grads who are, male like myself, and we've made an enormous effort to try to make it balanced. Our community, we have a whole community of computer scientists. It's roughly 43% female, and including the undergraduates, but also the older ranks. And we, as far as the companies we've invested in, we don't specifically look for female-founded or diverse companies. We're looking to make the most money we can, so we are just focusing on return on investments. But I think by having a diverse team and by having a diverse community, it's like May was saying, that enables you to attract other groups who might otherwise self-select out. And so through no particular effort, our investments happen to be 47% female CEOs, and that's without looking at that. It's just kind of after the fact we've noticed that's the stat we have. And I'm very proud of that, and it's not by accident, it's by the intentional efforts on those other parts of our work.
I want to comment on what you just said. When you look at the data, it already shows that female founders are actually much more profitable with their companies than their counterparts. So, and then when you look at, again, data that, when you have a diverse team, it is a much better result than when you don't. So there's definitely that correlation that it is better to be diverse, it is better to have female and male co-founders, etc., because both sides together are making such a difference than when you have the one side.
I will certainly say that the important thing you're saying here also implicitly is that you should be aligning what you're doing with your profit motives. Because if you're thinking of it as, I must create opportunity for people in this sort of affirmative action kind of way, and the implication is they may not be as capable, there's a conflict. And at some point you're gonna, if you have two, it's much better to figure out how can you make it aligned so that I can make the most money by doing this. And fortunately, I think the good news is that usually actually it is more profitable if you think about it right. So in our case, we considered always diversity a competing goal versus profit, and we ended up coming to the conclusion that no, it's actually a strategy to maximize our profit. And I think better if you can align everything to be aligned rather than kind of feeling like you're competing between different priorities.
I agree. Ali, I have another question for you. You know, you have now had experience, you've been investing and now with the new firm. What is your advice to someone who's a founder from an underrepresented minority looking for funding? What is the best advice that you can give them? Obviously coming to you or the rest of the panelists, but how can they get there, or what steps should they take to make sure or ensure that they are getting funding?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any generic advice for, I mean, I think it's certainly some of the things that other people here have already said. It helps to, if you're looking at firms, to look at who the people are, and as May mentioned, look for people who you think will be sympathetic to you or who, you know, would connect with you. I would say form a team who is different from yourself. So, you know, if you're Iranian, you know, if your team is all Iranians, that's not diverse. You know, try to have people who are different. They might all be underrepresented minorities, but if they're a few different ones, you have more diversity. So, you know, so I would say do that. I do think though the most important thing is just focus on building a great product. The key, investors are not, I mean, there's some pattern matching as Ali mentioned, but at the end of the day, investors are looking for something that customers will want. So if you build a product that customers will love, you'll overcome all sorts, any other handicap. You know, and so I'd say that should be your primary, you know, absolute focus is make sure that you have a good sense of what customers want and be laser focused on building that.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I might just add, I completely agree with what Ali said. I think one of the things that, you know, underrepresented founders can do beyond, you know, building a good business, like that goes without saying. There's no sympathy involved simply because of someone's background or lack of background. I think that being as process-driven as possible, so not allowing things to chance. So have, you know, really basic, you know, tactical example. If you're going for investor meetings, like show up on time, make sure that you put everything in the calendar, have your data room ready to go with all your due diligence documents, labels. Like, don't give excuse to investors to, you know, question your behavior or something that might not be comfortable because of your identity. Like, give them everything they need so it becomes about the product and the business and the pitch. And I know that's easier said than done, but sometimes I think we can do ourselves a disadvantage by just not doing some of the basics. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second is like recognizing that we're operating in a system where there are inherent unconscious biases, systematic disadvantages, particularly for particular groups where there's intersectionality in disadvantage. If you're a woman and black, like, it's way worse than being just a white woman or being a black man, for example. And so, you know, if you're in particular groups where you are aware of some of the investor biases, there was a study done where it showed that investors are more likely when doing a pitch meeting with women to ask them questions that question their business and, you know, basically question the market size, question its feasibility, whereas when you're asking questions of a male founder, you'll often ask them how big can it be, and it's like allowing them to paint that big vision and picture. So say knowing this bias exists or this behavior exists, a founder could go into a meeting and say you're a woman, make sure that if a question is being asked that minimizes the market opportunity, preempt that and reframe questions to be able to show like the vision that you have. Be able to come back with numbers and statistics that allow some of these kind of behavioral biases to be nipped in the bud in real time. And some of that just means doing extra research and homework. But the beautiful thing about what's happened with some of the disasters of the last 2 years, and as these things are being surfaced to the, you know, surface, particularly with diversity and sexual harassment, is that a lot of firms are being set up specifically targeting underrepresented and minority founders. So whether that's the Female Founders Fund or Aspect Ventures that, you know, just investing in women, or you've got Backstage Capital with Arlen who wants to invest in underrepresented founders, like that's a good starting point. It's not the only source of capital, but there are firms that particularly recognize the systematic disadvantage and are there, to help these founders.
One more thing I'll add is that raising capital is not like earning a GPA or a batting average. It doesn't matter your average score. It matters if one or two investors take a huge bet on you. And this is true for any person who's fundraising, regardless of background. So I would encourage all founders not themselves to get discouraged. Of course, if you're hearing the same feedback from multiple investors about a problem with your pitch or your idea, be open-minded to that. But I wouldn't let a few rejections get you down, and odds are, given what you two have said, that those rejections may come in due to reasons out of your control. But remember, you don't need every investor to like your idea, you need 1 or 2 investors to love your idea.
Can I iterate on this? I would say you would definitely get rejections, not that it may, it actually will. It's a game of numbers. I think there is big kind of gap between the public perceptions. This is especially for new founders. There's a big gap between the perception of how fundraising works and how it actually works. Where what we keep hearing about is, oh, someone showed up, great idea. They, first meeting they got the check. That's just not how it works. It's a game of numbers. You basically have to, you mentioned process. I'll tell you that last time I tried the process of fundraising, I had a massive spreadsheet with every investor I could come up with. I found the ones that I thought would be more friendly to me, but I wasn't limiting my kind of search to them. And it was a very much kind of a process-driven thing where I was, going one after the other until someone finally kind of gets it. There is a couple of more things that I want to mention. One is, don't let the conversation we are having right now about these biases, etc., discourage you. At the end of the day, you can't change how investors are thinking or those biases. The only way we change that is by really breaking through and showing them these great examples of what's possible. But there's one thing you can do, it's in your control, it's finding product market fit. You find that investors would invest, they don't care about your funny accent or all those other things. Isn't that true? Yeah, and I think part of the game is actually the psychology of it. It's keeping your spirit up and kind of going at it until you actually break through. But surround yourself with great advisors. That's kind of, I referred to this earlier. There's a problem in which we may not have access to them, but they are the ones who are going to help get you to a position where you finally show up in front of an investor and they're gonna take a bet on you. Last point, don't think that you're going to build a company on VC's back. Build your company, and at the right time, the VCs will come and support you. So this idea that you have an idea and the VCs are going to help get you there, it doesn't work like that. That's the wrong perception. The right way is you're building a great business. At one point, VCs come along and help you grow.
Can I add a little bit on that? One of the words you use is the word I often use when I give advice. Use the word search when you're talking about searching for investors. And this is I give this advice to all founders, not specifically female or underrepresented minorities, is that fundraising, if you approach it as I'm trying to convince someone to invest in me, I don't think it's actually as accurate. Think of it more as I am searching for an investor. And the reason I make the distinction is you can, if your idea is X, out of the universe of 1,000 investors out there, there are a few who are predisposed to fall in love with X because they see the world the same way you do, they've had the same experiences, maybe they are a potential customer or they used to work in that field. And if you think of it as each investor I meet, I'm trying to convince them to love X, it's going to be very difficult. You can usually tell within 5 minutes, oh, okay, this person is not interested. But think of it as there is somebody out there who does, and it's a search task to find them, and not a persuasion task. And you can also improve your odds greatly, like you said, to create a spreadsheet. Do the research, instead of actually pitching 1,000 people, try to narrow down the ones that are most inclined to be interested in X, whatever X is. And then, a very big, important task with this is networking. And I was thinking this, to your original question of how to overcome bias if you're underrepresented is try to make, use your network to its maximum potential. You might have, get other people to introduce you. Do not do cold calls. You know, I get lots of pitches from LinkedIn or email that are cold calls, and it's a pretty negative signal because it implies this person either couldn't or didn't bother trying to find somebody in common with me. If they're from another country, okay, maybe, you know, I'll be sympathetic, but I get a lot of cold calls from somebody who's in Palo Alto. Like, how did you not find someone in common with me? You know, it's difficult, but it's doable. And if you didn't make that effort, it's a negative signal. And you know, the other thing I would say is, no matter whether you are underrepresented in whatever way, be confident. You know, you will overcome whatever biases people have if you simply are sure of yourself, and that includes just your poise, how you speak. Our friend May here is actually a very good example of confident, poised speaking. But honestly, it does come across in a meeting. If somebody is, you know, hunched and unsure and, you know, looking for validation, people notice that. Versus if they are confident and have good posture and are, you know, leading the conversation. A lot of investors are looking for these, you know, very subtle signals to decide whether they think something is worth investing in. So being confident of yourself is really effective.
So be confident and be prepared for rejection, which I feel like is one of those advantages you have as a man. You're used to it since, you know, teenage years.
It's funny you say that, because I was going to say this idea of search is like dating. Like, there's someone out there for you. You just got to get through the numbers to find that person. If you do your research and you know what you love and you're working on yourself and improving yourself, you're likely to find the right person. But I mean, I think it's a terrible analogy given the blurring of personal and professional adventure. But I do think that the process-driven approach that we've talked about is really important. And one thing I wanted to build on what Ali mentioned is, you know, this same with me. I get a lot of cold call emails, and my altruistic self wants to think that I'm going to give equal credence to every inbound request I get, but the reality is, cold emails I'm not as excited about, other than, you know, referred emails or referred introductions. And, you know, the question I always get asked from first-time founders or founders who might not be in the Bay Area is like, but how do I know, like, how am I going to get in touch with someone if I have, like, no connection to that world? And the reality is, it doesn't mean that you need to be best friends with venture capitalists. It means that you need to get to enough events, add everyone on LinkedIn, be methodical in seeing who knows who, fostering relationships and building them over time, and being creative. So your lawyer, or your marketing person, or your outsourced CFO, or someone you went to high school with, like, these are all people that might be able to refer you to someone. And some of the best referrals I get are entrepreneurs who were rejected by my firm, but have stayed in touch and are referring fellow entrepreneurs. And I might have really had a great relationship with that entrepreneur, but they weren't the right fit for our firm. But I'm going to probably take a meeting with someone that they refer. And entrepreneurs can meet tons of other entrepreneurs through a lot of these events, and that can be a really good source as well. So, you know, don't feel like you need to go out there and get every VC's like business card and put them in your Rolodex. Like, you need to just be creative as well.
I really want to touch on the connections. When you're going to networking events, one thing early on I was told is, know the people you want to know in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So even you may not meet them today, if you're thinking about a company today, you should know these investors today, so that when you're ready, you have that warm intro already. You already know them, they know you, they know who you are as well. You'll build a relationship on that. With that note, I would like to open it up to our audience, our attendees, to see if they have any questions, if that's okay with everyone on the panel. Yeah, thank you so much to everyone. If you have a question, please stand up, tell us your name, and then you can start with the question. I'll take the gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name is Arash.